Alright, I know. I've been talking about a lot of music from 2017, but in my defense, there's just too much good stuff out there. Breath of the Wild had what I consider to be my favorite soundtrack of the year, but god, it's really hard to say that because NieR Automata exists, and that soundtrack is absolutely depressing, dystopian, hopeless, and completely banging. The compositions themselves are top tier, like I'm talking literal top shelf, break out the expensive whiskey, sit down, and just transcend. And the reason for this is that it breaks ground and establishes utter dominance in its usage of the human voice. So, to start this off, what goes into selecting instruments and compositions? Do you randomly pick based off the sound that you want? Or maybe you decide based off the genre that you're writing? Regardless, instrument choice is crucial, and prominently featuring a certain instrument can really set the tone for an entire soundtrack. I'm looking at you, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, you and all your trumpets. The voice is arguably the oldest instrument known to humankind, but if you're an active player of video games, you'll notice that it's featured pretty frequently in game music today, actually. It's often featured in big AAA titles for intros, credits, and main themes, often with choir, soloistic lines, or maybe even coming from the characters in games themselves. But how often do you hear the voice in the core soundtrack during gameplay? Well, not often. Almost never, actually, unless it's a rhythm game. There are exceptions such as Sonic Adventure 2, but they're pretty few and far between. And this is because the voice is an absurdly powerful instrument, and it's one that by far holds the most weight in the context of media, which is why the voice is always saved for these non-gameplay moments. But in NieR and NieR Automata, you hear the voice constantly. And I'm not talking choirs, I'm talking about a soloistic, humanistic voice. The soundtracks of these games are huge, but the through line is the consistent presence of the human voice during gameplay. It's featured just as much as any string, wind, or percussion instrument in any other game. The fact that they can pull this off is huge, as the sheer emotional range delivered by the voice is incredible, and its utilization absolutely cannot be understated when talking about this soundtrack. But why isn't the voice normally used for gameplay? The answer usually revolves around the usage of lyrics. Lyrics add a focal point to music that isn't there when you use physical instruments. They provide literary meaning to our music, to tell a story, convey specific emotions, or maybe even let us feel the intended emotion more blatantly to keep us from speculating. This focal point is often a negative for gameplay experience, since gameplay music is meant to be in the background and heighten the player experience, not to override the gameplay. Vocals can distract from this experience. So why does it work for NieR? We're going to start this dive by asking what language the lyrics are in. Are they English, Japanese, or maybe French? Or maybe something else entirely? When showing people this soundtrack, these are usually the first three languages that people ask me about. And while I'm not a linguist or an expert on languages by any means, I definitely thought they were French at first myself. But oh, was I wrong. If you do some research into the development of the soundtrack of the first NieR, you'll find that the vocalist, Emmy Evans, actually created a wide variety of fictional languages, collectively referred to as her Chaos language. This language was based on real-world languages, but they were entirely nonsensical in nature. I'm going to oversimplify this just a little bit, but the general idea is that she would take a language that does exist and imagine what that language would sound like 1,000 years in the future. The goal behind this was so that the lyrics would become unrecognizable even by native speakers of the original language. From what I understand, sometimes there will be real words or phrases sprinkled in, but they're grammatically incorrect, and therefore still fit into the whole incoherency narrative. She had done this for most music in the game other than Song of the Ancients, which was entirely fictional, created by mixing several different languages together. Regardless of the track, however, all literary meaning is hereby removed from the lyrics through this process, and this is the real secret behind why the vocals work so well, as using a fictional language accomplishes a few goals. First, as said before, when you add vocals to music, you have lyrics. That is, unless you're singing only on vowels like you might find in production VSTs. However, because the lyrics in NieR aren't associated with meaning, they don't need to be concerned with word choice, meaning that the singer can transition in a more fluid way, not worrying about literary meaning. Then, as said before, lyrics pull attention to the vocals and distract from the gameplay experience. But here, the vocals are allowed to stay in the background because there's nothing for our inherent knowledge of languages to focus on. This allows for gameplay to remain front and center at all times. And then maybe most importantly, this allows the voice to be presented more as a physical instrument, such as say a flute or a cello. This allows the music to more easily follow instrumental music forms. The voice is an instrument, but vocal music is not equivalent to instrumental music in very many aspects. If you look throughout music history, you'll find a very large distinction exists between musical forms that feature voice and instrumental forms that do not. In general, video game music historically tends to follow instrumental forms of music and not vocal ones. When you're writing about vocal music, you need to be mindful of lyrics, making sure that syllables and vowels will not only be easy to sing, but also be understood by the listener. But because literary meaning is removed and the voice is able to be as flexible as humanly possible, you're able to approach the voice in a more instrumental and almost humanistic format. This is where the soundtrack truly shines, and this is the exact reason why the voice here is so haunting and appropriate for NieR. Naturally, because of this, if you take a look at the soundtrack, you'll find that most of the forms and genres of music are instrumental. The voice is presented within these constraints and not on top of it. This would not be nearly as possible if the lyrics were in a set language, even if it wasn't one native to the player. So, what separates this from the more typical usage of voice in games? This comes down to the song format, or what you're probably most familiar with in pop, rock, or a very wide variety of today's music that you'll find on the radio. Simplifying the format, songs typically feature an intro, verse, chorus, bridge, and ending, of which the verse and chorus are repeated in different or similar ways. Songs are reserved for openings, cinematics, climaxes, or credits, typically in media. Because of this, songs are what you're likely most familiar with in the context of games and vocal music. And this is because the association of lyrics holds a ton of weight. Actually, of all things, anime is the perfect example of this. For instance, you'll often find that many anime use their main theme for the biggest, most climactic point of the series. These climactic moments are perfect for vocals because at this point the vocals easily heighten the experience due to very focused scenes where your attention will not be distracted. It's so effective because we're already familiar with the music, we're hyper-focused on the action, and it's so different from what we're accustomed to. It literally accompanies the definition of a climax. So, with all this talk of song format, how many are in NieR Automata? There are a few that tickle the threshold, but truthfully, there's really only one: Weight of the World. With this track, there's 3 different versions: English, Japanese, and the fictional Chaos language. This is fully in song format. There's an intro, verse, chorus, bridge, and most importantly above everything else, literary meaning with lyrics. Other tracks get close to the song format such as Morning, Voice of No Return, and Vague Hope, but these still use the nonsense words, so there's no meaning behind them. So where do you first hear Weight of the World? You hear it at the ending cutscene and credits of the first playthrough of the game, which cements this fact in that they're saving understandable lyrics for more emotional scenes, and they're using the voice in the soundtrack more as an instrumental. Now, this fact shows to me that the voice in the majority of the soundtrack removes the association of the voice as far as possible, and shows that Yoko Taro, Keiichi Okabe, and Emmy Evans are using the voice to function as part of the world and part of the lore. In fact, you can even find examples of them saying that this was their original goal with the first NieR. However, when I first realized this, I didn't know that this was their intention. When I realized how simple they made everything seem involving the voice, my mind was absolutely blown. Making languages, removing literacy, allowing the voice to function like a physical instrument, all so that they can capture this very dystopian feeling, that's literally the coolest thing to me. As an aside, Emmy Evans' vocals were so important to them that they often rewrote music or even the scenes to fit her performances, and I've heard that sometimes she actually improvised the lyrics as well, which would further cement the random, incoherent vocalizations into removing even further meaning. However, I haven't really been able to find a source confirming this, so as far as I'm aware, this is just speculation. This soundtrack does so much good, not only for video game music, but for the human voice as well. Maybe down the line, NieR will be a vessel for the voice to be a more prominently featured instrument. This isn't the first game to have done something like this necessarily, but it's definitely the most high profile to date that has reached the most people. As always, we can take these ideas and apply them to our own music and games as well. I wrote the main theme for an upcoming Under Wraps project that needed vocals, where I had the vocalist write nonsense lyrics that sounded as if they could be in German. These ideas were taken from me playing NieR Automata. The biggest thing as composers, gamers, and listeners that I want you to take away today is something that I'm coining as making an impactful choice. Our choices in our creative work hold weight, and if we want to make a statement with our music or our art, we need to make sure that these choices are impactful with the way that we use this weight. Creating an original language so that you can use vocals freely, to remove the context of the voice and present it in an instrumental context, that's an impactful choice. Every time we write music, we make choices. Each time our listeners hear our music, they hear our choices. Finding new ways to present music through our choices is how we get soundtracks that will literally stand the test of time. Understanding instrument choice and how to get the sound you want is a great first step, but don't stop there. Keep going, see how far you can take your ideas. The farther you can go, the more people you'll bring along for the ride. Doing something like this in our own work can be scary, and it can be a huge risk. I'm sure it was for the NieR team as well, but really, most success stories, they start with a risk. Thank you so much for stopping by today, everyone. I greatly appreciate you checking this out. If you liked what you saw, I'd love if you subscribed to the channel and liked this video. As always, feel free to follow me and get in touch with me at Kylidian. And if you want to get involved with an awesome community of game composers and learn a bunch about the craft, check out Beats to Play Games 2. It's a Discord server of game composers that I help organize, and it's a great place to be. The link is in the description below. Stay awesome, everyone. Have a great day.